Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a little bit more work on the 1998 Jeep Cherokee XJ two-door Sport that we're in the middle of LS swapping. This is actually a vehicle that belongs to a customer from Texas. We live here in Utah, which is it's like a 20-some hour drive. So I was really honored that he actually brought the vehicle all the way up here for me to work on it. We're installing a 6-liter LQ4. We're making great progress. This project is actually very near the finish line. In fact, today just might be the day that we hear the 6-liter fire up for the very first time, which is really awesome. But before we get to that, we do have a fair amount of wiring left to go. So if you like building custom, high performance, or off-road trucks, or all of the above, help me out and hit that subscribe button. We are trying to reach 100,000 subs by the end of this year. So let's jump right into it. So just quickly looking at the to-do list, you can kind of see that most of the items, especially in the left column, this is all just individual connections that I need to make on the wiring. And just about everything over here is done. These two brackets up here for the battery and the shift bracket, those are like 99% done. I just have to finalize the installation. So we're making really good progress. But speaking of the battery, that's kind of one of the things I'm going to focus on today, because we are doing a remote mount battery. And that's mainly due to the fact that, or the shape of the accessory drive that we're running. This is an LS Simple kit. There's nothing wrong with the accessory bracket other than the fact that the AC pump sits way out here. And this is not designed specific for an XJ Cherokee. This is just kind of a universal bracket that was provided to me. And normally the battery sits kind of like at a 45-degree angle on these XJs, and it would come like right through here. So we decided we didn't want to run a different AC compressor, which meant we are going to have to run a remote battery. Now, that's definitely not my first choice, but it's just kind of one of the things that we had to work with. So because this is an enclosed vehicle, there's no truck bed or frame rail that I can mount the battery on out back. That means we have to have the battery isolated in a battery box. I mean, simply for the safety factor, because you don't want a battery inside your passenger compartment usually, especially if it's a wet cell battery. So I went to Summer Racing. I picked up just a universal battery box kit. And it's just this plastic battery box. I do actually prefer the plastic rather than the aluminum ones, because plastic does not conduct electricity and you're gonna have some cables and things running through here. And I would much rather have a non-conductive material to isolate the battery. And plus, the plastic looks a lot more low-key rather than like one of those shiny, polished aluminum fancy battery boxes you might see in the back of a race car. So now we gotta talk about mounting the battery. There's a couple different options, and the customer decided that we wanted it right in the rear seat area. He is no longer going to have a rear seat functional in the Jeep, and so that's kind of the spot that we wanted the battery to sit. Now, batteries are heavy. They're, I don't know, they're 40 pounds, 50 pounds or whatever, and this is an off-road vehicle, which means you never want to see this happen, but there is a fair chance you could experience a rollover at some point. And because of this, or especially because of this, you want to make sure that battery is solidly mounted. So even if this Jeep is upside down, that battery is not going anywhere. So here's the bracket that I came up with. This is made from 3/16 inch thick steel by 1.5 inches, and it bolts to the front seat rail, or the front of the back seat rail, in two places with 3/8 inch bolts. It bolts to the floor pan with another 3/8 inch bolt, and then it bolts right here. This is actually an existing seat belt hole, and the reason why that is bare is because I'm also going to be running my battery ground on that exact bolt. So it's got 4 3/8 bolts in total. This is a pretty strong section up here. This is a very strong mount. And this one is going to be fairly strong as well. I'm going to put a big fender washer on the bottom. And then, like I said, it's 3/16 steel. It's all TIG welded together, and it's shaped so that the battery is going to sit perfectly flat, kind of like that, and it'll all contour to basically the shape of the floorboard. This is a shifter bracket, and I'll probably show you guys this going in next time, but it bolts to one of the bell housing tabs back there. It bolts to one of the neutral shift switch bolts right there. That is part of the original shift bracket there. It's reinforced, once again, TIG welded all together. Those two brackets, they take a lot of time. I mean, it doesn't look that complicated when it's done, but everything for this project is one-off, so it's not like you can just go out and buy a bracket that's going to, allow these things to work. Like the shift bracket, Novak actually provided a shift cable bracket that's for like a TJ LS swap, and it would have worked, but just due to the shape of the trans tunnel, it would not work with the XJ Cherokee. So that's just one more bracket that you've got to make. And each of these things is an hour or two or three here and there. And the time does add up. I've also been doing a little bit of wiring underneath the hood. It kind of looks like a mess right now, but I've actually made quite a bit of progress. A lot of it is just kind of rearranging stuff through here. The Holley harness, it just comes with, I mean, the fuses and stuff. Like this one I had to extend, and none of these little fuses or relays, none of them had any wire covering on them. They were just bare wires. And I didn't really like the look of that, so I wrapped all of them in some cloth wire covering just so it'll make it look a little neater. I just adjusted a few lengths of things here and there. I bunched together all of my accessory wires that I have yet to connect. These are things like the power, the ground, and the switched wires. This is a heavy wire I ran for the fuel pump. That's going to send the power to the fuel pump, and then my main battery power harness for the Holley computer I ran. I put a couple holes in the firewall right here. I don't know if you can see them or not, but there are three 3/4 inch holes. One's for the battery cable, one's for the Holley harness, and one is for the accessories. And then I'll just kind of show you real quick. This is the power harness here that's going to power the Holley setup. There's my fuel pump wire, and then the battery bracket you saw is going to sit right there with the battery box on top of it. So that is where we're going to get started. All right, guys, so we kind of fast forwarded through a lot of that work, but this is the moment that we have all been waiting for. I know Jimmy, the owner of the Jeep, he's really excited to hear how this thing's gonna sound. I know I've put a lot of hours of labor in this thing. I'm ready to hear it start up, and I'm sure you guys who have been following along with the build are also ready to hear this 6-liter LQ4 fire up for the very first time, legitimately under the hood of this XJ Jeep Cherokee. So I spent all morning doing a whole bunch of wiring, just getting things tidied up. So let me kind of go over all the steps that I took. And this is just sort of, some of it's specific to an XJ and some of it's just good general wiring tech to keep in mind. The first thing that we did was mounted the battery kind of way back there in the trunk, or whatever you want to call the back end of this Jeep. Now, if you're doing a remote mount battery, we talked about that a little bit earlier. One thing I didn't mention is the vent. This is a sealed battery box. There's like a little gasket on the top, but I also had to install this clear little vent tube that goes in the side of the case. It's a really tight fit, and then it goes down through a hole in the floorboard. That way, if there's any vapors or fumes or anything in here, that'll get vented outside the car. There's a few connections we've made, positive and negative cables, obviously, and then the little wire right there, positive and negative, that goes all the way up to the Holley computer. Now, they're not too picky about some of the wiring in terms of where you get the power and ground from, but those 2 heavy gauge wires for the Holley setup, they do want you to run those all the way to the battery, whether that's a front mount battery or a rear mount battery like we're doing here. So all the wiring that is run on this Jeep is protected with some of that plastic corrugated tubing, especially where it runs underneath the floor, because it's just sitting on top of the sheet metal with the carpet kind of on top. So I always protect the wiring with, like I said, that plastic tubing. I wrap it with electrical tape about every 8 inches or so just to make sure it won't pop off. And then for the rest of the stuff, I've just been wrapping it with some of this cloth black braided wiring cover. The computer is 100% mounted. It took a lot of time just to kind of finalize all the circuits right here. The battery cable right here pops through the firewall. Like I mentioned, there's a couple of holes there. Goes across the top and then down to the junction block. This wire here, this feeds power to the, so they have a couple of battery feeds. This feeds power all the way over to the Holley harness. We've got one for the engine harness and one for the trans harness. They join together right here. Everything is crimped and heat shrunk. I have yet to cover this branch of the wiring harness because there's like 2 connections here I have yet to make. I just want to fire the thing up before I finalize that. But here's kind of how everything runs. It has a nice gentle loop here underneath the computer. It runs up, follows the factory wiring, and goes down. All the engine stuff branches out to the engine. Transmission stuff branches out to the transmission. I've got a ground right there. There's 2 ground wires, once again, one for the engine side, one for the transmission side. That's a factory ground bolt right there, so I know it's good. Let's see, I've got 2 or 3 things here to talk about. This little yellow wire right here, this is a jumper for the Jeep neutral and park safety switch. So this won't start unless we have that wire jump there. So when I'm all done here, I will clean that up and probably solder those 2 wires back there, or I'm not sure what we'll do there, but we'll make that jumper in place. And then we have 2 red wires with white stripes. These are both switched ignition. This one here comes from the Jeep original engine harness, and this one here I pulled from the trans side of things. Holley does recommend you have your switched leads for both the engine and transmission come from a separate source, because apparently it can backfeed and keep running even though you turn the key off. So that's the wiring on the Jeep side of things. The very last thing I'll mention down here, this is where I'm grabbing my start signal from. I just have this disconnected while I'm doing all the rest of the wiring, but as soon as I plug this in, we should be good to turn it over. So I have added all the fluids. We've got engine oil, we've got power steering fluid, we've got transmission fluid all in. I don't have any coolant in yet, so I'm not going to let the thing run for very long. I do have no air intake on it yet. I do have the 90-degree elbow. This is a 4-inch to 3.5-inch reducer. We talked about this in detail a couple episodes ago. I do have the inlet air temperature sensor just plugged in, so it will know exactly what the temperature is. See, the computer's finalized. Talked about protecting the cables. Everything is like, yeah, wiring, we're like 99.5% done. So as soon as we fire this thing up and I know that it runs, I'll just take care of the last few connections. But I'll be honest, I'm nervous. I have loaded up the calibration in the computer. I got my laptop out here, downloaded the Holley software. That took a little while because there's like 3 different versions of the software, and then there's like 2 different versions of firmware, and I couldn't get the firmware in the computer to update, so I had to go and re-download a little bit older version of the software. Kind of a pain, but not too bad. So we get the new tune that I made loaded up in the computer. There's a lot of information, but let's turn the key and see if this thing starts up. So we've already checked the fuel pump. I know that it primes. I can hear that working right now. Just gonna make sure I am linked up here. Whew. There goes nothing. Oh, gotta plug the starter in. For real this time. That was way too easy. Got 45 pounds of oil pressure. It's gonna take a minute to kind of learn and do its thing there, but whew, I call that a success. So real quick, I noticed the idle air control motor is maxed out. Basically, that means it's not getting quite enough air at idle, so I'm just gonna open the throttle set screw just a little bit. That way the idle air doesn't have to open quite so far, but I mean, we're doing good so far. Try it again. Alrighty guys, a huge sigh of relief right now because the thing fired up for the first time. We've got no oil squirt now. We've got no transmission fluid coming out of places it's not supposed to. The power steering kind of did its thing. So we are well on our way to wrapping up this XJ and getting it out on the road for its maiden voyage. So let me just kind of go over what I had to adjust really quickly. I'll go over what I have left to do, and that'll wrap up this video. So the idle air control motor is responsible for controlling the idle speed on a throttle body setup like we have here. The throttle body is controlled by a cable, that's your main throttle, and this is what dictates how much air is allowed to bypass the throttle plate, which kind of fine-tunes idle speed. Now, this is a brand new throttle body, so the set screw is just backed all the way out. But the idle air control motor was maxed out. That means it was open all the way at 100% and it still wouldn't idle. So all I had to do was tighten up this set screw right here, which kind of just opens the throttle body just a tiny amount and lets some more air in, which brought the duty cycle down to, I'm shooting for like 40 to 50%. So that can raise and lower the idle speed from where it's set. Not a huge deal, totally normal for a brand new setup. The 2 circuits that I picked for the switched ignition, those are working just fine. So now I can permanently attach both of these, and then I'll come up with something for the neutral safety switch. Other than that, I'm going to just wrap up that last little bit of wire in the wire loom. Oh, there is one more thing I do need to connect on the Holley side of things. This gray wire, this is part of the transmission side of things. This just needs to go in the cabin, and then we're going to connect it to a 12-volt signal. Whenever the brakes are applied, that will just give a signal to unlock the torque converter clutch. I have 2 cooling fan relays that I need to get wired up. One of them is mounted already. I just have the harness kind of coiled up there. Pretty simple. I'm going to get the high current power right here. I'm also going to connect the low side of the relay to this power here because the Holley computer controls the ground for both relays. I'm going to have 2 cooling fans running independently of one another. And this part right here is where the Holley auxiliary connectors, well, one of these, I don't know, I think this one or that one. Anyway, that's where we're going to get the auxiliary signal for the cooling fans. I'll mount the other relay, and because there are actually 3 fans, 1 large and 2 small, we're going to have this be the primary cooling fan. That'll come on with 1 relay, and the secondary cooling fans will be a pair. Whenever the coolant temp gets a little bit higher, both of these will kick on in addition to the first, so we'll have plenty of airflow to keep it cool. Let's see, I have yet to build the intake tube. That'll be very simple, just kind of a straight and a little elbow to stick the filter down here. I'll weld in the bung to have the inlet air temp sensor and maybe have a little bracket or something to hold it in place. Other than that, I still have to attach the shift cable onto the side of the transmission. The bracket's already made. I just have to figure or finalize the pivot for where the shift arm mounts because that is adjustable. I've got a couple of other odds and ends. I haven't got any coolant in it yet, so I didn't run it for that long. I'm going to add some coolant, add some fluid to the transfer case, get the shifter on there. I mentioned that. Got my list over here, just kind of a lot of stuff crossed off, but a lot of little odds and ends that I keep adding on there. But yeah, we are making good progress, and hopefully in the next video that you see on this XJ, we're going to be taking it out for its maiden voyage. I want to say thank you guys for watching. I do appreciate each and every one of you. Do a couple things for me if you don't mind though. Click the like button on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you like the content on the XJ, on the Ugly Truck, on the Duramax. And we get another Ford project coming up actually right after this one. Also on the Ugly Truck, I do have got a new engine block sitting over there, so we're going to be doing a full-blown build on that as well, hopefully a little bit later on this summer. Got a lot of cool stuff going on, so in order to stay up to date, hit that subscribe button. Also visit tolmanperformance.com to help support the channel. Grab yourself a t-shirt, a hat, a hoodie, or what have you. I appreciate you guys, I honestly do. Thank you so much for watching. I'm kind of scatterbrained right now because I'm so excited this thing fired up. I've got to get this video edited and then figure out what to do for the next one, but whew. Major milestone, guys. Awesome. Catch you in a couple days.